Welcome to the channel, Final Slaves. Today's story, Lydia Moore's story from Georgia in 1862, will surely touch your heart deeply, I'm certain. So, relax, stay quiet for a moment, and listen carefully. Before we start, remember to subscribe to the channel and write in the comments which city you're listening from. Your participation helps keep these stories alive. Let's begin. Georgia, 1862. For over a year the war had been raging when Lydia Moore first understood that miracles could be created by her hands, miracles her life would never allow her to claim. She was 10 years old, barefoot, a dress made from flour sacks hanging loose on her undernourished frame. Her fingers were calloused from picking cotton since she was old enough to carry a sack. Her back already held the permanent curve that marked her people, her eyes carried shadows no child should hold. Isolated in the red clay hills of central Georgia sat Magnolia Creek Plantation, far enough from the war's main theaters that life continued its brutal routine despite distant cannon thunder. The plantation had belonged to the Vance family for 3 generations, passed down through careful marriages and ruthless business practices that accumulated land and human property in equal measure. Master Harold Vance had died the previous winter, leaving the estate to his widow Eleanora and their adult son Marcus, who promptly enlisted in the Confederate cavalry and rode off to defend Southern honor, leaving his mother to manage 300 acres and 47 enslaved people with only an aging overseer and her own bitter determination. Eleanora Vance was 42 years old, consumed by disappointments that had curdled into a vinegar sourness poisoning everything she touched. Pretty once, or so people said, but years of Georgia sun and unfulfilled ambitions had hardened her features into something sharp and unforgiving. In her youth she had fancied herself an artist, taken lessons from an itinerant portrait painter passing through Savannah, filled sketchbooks with competent but uninspired drawings of flowers, buildings, occasional stiff portraits. She had dreamed of recognition, of her work hanging in parlors and galleries, of being known as more than just another plantation wife. But her work was mediocre, and she knew it, a knowing worse than ignorance. Her paintings were technically adequate yet soulless, the kind of art that drew polite compliments and was forgotten the moment the viewer turned away. She had married Harold Vance partly because he praised her watercolors effusively, though she suspected even then he was praising her dowry more than her talent. After marriage she painted sporadically, but motherhood and plantation management consumed her time, and her lack of genuine gift consumed her enthusiasm. By the time Harold died, Eleanora's easel had gathered dust for 5 years, a monument to dreams withered on the vine. Lydia Moore belonged to Magnolia Creek the way the cotton plants and red clay soil belonged to it, which is to say she was considered property rather than person, asset rather than human, a thing to be bought, sold, worked, and discarded according to the needs and whims of those who owned the land. Her mother, Ruth, was the plantation seamstress, skilled with needle and thread, tasked with making and mending clothes for the enslaved community and occasionally for the Vance family when Eleanora didn't want to pay town prices. Lydia's father had been sold away when she was 3, traded for a breeding mare and cash to settle a gambling debt. Lydia barely remembered him, only a feeling of safety that vanished one morning and never returned. Ruth raised her daughter the desperate way enslaved mothers raised children, trying to keep her safe while knowing safety was an illusion that could shatter any moment the white folks decided otherwise. She taught Lydia to be invisible, to keep her eyes down, to speak only when spoken to endure without complaint because complaint meant the whip or worse. She taught her the songs carrying coded messages of resistance and hope, taught her about the drinking gourd in the sky pointing north toward freedom, taught her to believe that somehow, someday, things might be different, even though neither could imagine how. What Ruth couldn't teach, couldn't control, couldn't suppress was the gift that manifested in Lydia's hands almost as soon as she could hold a stick. The child drew constantly, compulsively, with whatever she could find. She drew in the dust of the cabin floor with her finger, images so precise and detailed other enslaved people would stop to stare. She drew on the walls of the cotton barn with charcoal from the fire, sketching mules, chickens, other slaves with an accuracy impossible for someone so young who had never received a moment of formal instruction. She collected blackberry juice in a stolen tin cup and used it as paint on scraps of cloth, a brush made from her own hair tied to a stick. She would study a face, a tree, a bird with an intensity that made her seem absent from her own body, her eyes cataloging every detail, her mind translating what she saw into marks that captured not just appearance but essence. When she drew her mother's face on a piece of bark using a nail, Ruth wept, seeing herself truly reflected there, her own exhaustion and love and sorrow rendered with a tenderness transcending crude materials. The other enslaved people recognized Lydia's gift as something extraordinary and slightly frightening, a manifestation of power in a powerless person, a flowering of beauty in a place designed to crush all beauty not serving white interests. Old Isaiah, who claimed to remember Africa, though most doubted it, said Lydia carried the spirit of the ancestors, that she had been marked by forces older than slavery, that her hands were instruments of something the white folks couldn't own no matter how many papers said they owned her body. Ruth was proud of her daughter's gift and terrified of it in equal measure, because anything making you special also made you vulnerable, visible, a target. Lydia drew because she couldn't not draw, because something inside demanded expression regardless of circumstances, because art was the only language she had for feelings too large and complex for a 10-year-old to otherwise articulate. She drew the cotton fields but gave the plants faces that screamed silently. She drew the plantation house as a beautiful monster, all graceful columns and predatory angles. She drew her own hands covered in invisible chains. She drew freedom as a bird flying toward a sun she'd never seen except in dreams. For months Lydia's art remained contained within the enslaved quarters, hidden from white eyes, a secret kept by people who understood anything precious must be protected from those who would steal or destroy it. But secrets on plantations were fragile things, sustained by collective will yet vulnerable to accident and circumstance. The accident came in late summer when Lydia was sent to the main house to help her mother with mending, carrying a basket of torn linens. While her mother worked in the sewing room, Lydia waited in the hallway, bored and restless. She found a piece of charcoal fallen from a scuttle near a fireplace, found a relatively clean section of wall hidden behind a tall cabinet, and in the 15 minutes she was left alone, she drew. She drew without thinking, her hands moving automatically, creating the image of a dead bird she had seen that morning beneath the magnolia tree, a small brown sparrow with wings spread and eyes empty, beautiful and terrible in its absolute stillness. Eleanora Vance discovered the drawing when she moved the cabinet later that afternoon, looking for a dropped earring. She stood frozen, staring at the charcoal sketch on her wall, her mind struggling to process what she saw. The drawing was magnificent, not good or promising or interesting, but magnificent. The technical skill would have been impressive in a trained adult artist, the emotional resonance, the way the dead bird seemed to embody mortality itself, was the work of someone with profound and mature understanding of beauty and loss. Eleanora's first thought was that someone had snuck into her house and created this as a prank or message. Her second thought, noticing charcoal smudges on the floor leading toward the sewing room, was that perhaps her seamstress Ruth had hidden artistic talent. Her third thought, storming into the sewing room and seeing 10-year-old Lydia with charcoal dust still on her small fingers, was the thought sealing the child's fate. This slave girl could paint, and Eleanora Vance could claim those paintings as her own. The realization hit Eleanora with the force of revelation. Here was the answer to all her disappointments, the solution to all her failed ambitions. She didn't need to develop talent she didn't possess, she just needed to control access to talent already existing. Who would question her? Who would believe an illiterate slave child, a piece of property, could create art rivaling the master's? The very absurdity of the truth would make the lie unassailable. Eleanora sent Ruth away on an errand and closed the sewing room door. She sat across from Lydia, studying the child with new eyes, seeing not a human being but a resource to exploit, a tool to use, a secret to keep. In a deceptively gentle voice she asked if the child had made the drawing on the wall. Lydia, terrified of punishment, tried to deny it. But Eleanora had seen the charcoal on her fingers, had seen the child's eyes flicker with recognition. When confronted with the image, Eleanora didn't punish Lydia for drawing on the wall. Instead she did something far more cruel. She smiled, a cold stretching of lips never reaching her eyes, and told Lydia she had a special gift, that she would have a special job now, that she was very lucky because not every slave got to work in the big house. She told Lydia she would move into the basement of the main house, into a room set up just for her, where she would make beautiful pictures helping the plantation and helping her people. Lydia didn't understand at first, didn't grasp the true nature of what was proposed. She just knew something bad was happening, something making her stomach hurt and skin feel cold. She asked if her mama could come too, and Eleanora's smile grew sharper as she explained no, Ruth would stay in the quarters where she belonged, but Lydia could see her mother sometimes if she was good and did what she was told. Then Eleanora explained the rules, and Lydia began to understand the trap closing around her. Lydia would paint pictures. Eleanora would sign them, show them, sell them. Nobody would ever know Lydia painted them. If Lydia told anyone, if she refused to paint, if she tried to run away or hurt herself or otherwise failed in her duties, then Ruth would be sold to the sugar plantations in Louisiana. Eleanora described those plantations in detail, her voice pleasant and factual, explaining how slaves there died within 5 years from brutal work and disease and heat, how Ruth would spend her last days cutting cane in swamps full of snakes and mosquitoes, how she would die far from anyone who loved her and be buried in an unmarked grave. Lydia was 10 years old. She understood enough to know she had no choice. She could paint, or her mother would die. That was the bargain, simple and terrible and absolute. That night Lydia was moved from the cabin she shared with her mother to the basement of the main house. The basement had been used for storage, a damp stone room with a small window near the ceiling letting in a square of light during the day and nothing at night. Eleonora had it cleared and furnished with an easel, a small table, a pile of canvases, and painting supplies from her own abandoned artistic pursuits. There was a thin mattress on the floor, a chamber pot in the corner, an oil lamp giving off more smoke than light. There was also a chain attached to a bolt in the wall, able to be locked around Lydia's ankle. Eleonora explained the chain was necessary to ensure Lydia didn't wander the house at night and disturb anyone. She said it almost apologetically, as if a minor inconvenience rather than the literal shackling of a child. The chain was long enough to let Lydia reach the easel, the table, the mattress, and the chamber pot, but not long enough to reach the door or the window. Long enough to work, not long enough to escape. That first night alone in the basement, Lydia cried until she had no tears left, until her body was empty of everything but fear and grief. She thought about her mother, about the cabin small and crowded but filled with love, about the songs and stories and embraces making even slavery bearable. She thought about the other children she had played with, about communal meals and whispered conversations and the network of care existing in the quarters despite everything designed to break it. Now she was alone, truly, completely alone in a way she had never been. The basement was cold despite the Georgia heat, stone walls seeming to absorb warmth rather than hold it. The darkness when Eleonora took the lamp away was absolute, thick and suffocating, full of sounds she couldn't identify. She lay on the thin mattress, felt the weight of the chain on her ankle, and understood her life had ended even though she still breathed. The next morning Eleonora returned with breakfast, a bowl of thin gruel and a piece of bread, better food than Lydia usually got but barely adequate. She also brought a book of paintings, reproductions of famous European works, and laid it open on the table. She pointed to a landscape, a pastoral scene of rolling hills, distant mountains, a river winding through green fields, and told Lydia to copy it onto a canvas. Lydia had never painted before. She had drawn with charcoal and improvised with berry juice, but never used real paints, never worked with oils and brushes and canvas. Eleonora showed her the basics, how to mix colors on a palette, how to load the brush, how to apply paint in layers. The instruction was perfunctory and impatient, less like teaching and more like explaining how to operate a machine. Then Eleonora left Lydia alone with the canvas and the paints and the expectation that genius would manifest on command. For a long time Lydia just stared at the blank canvas, at the paint smelling strange and chemical, at the brushes with different sizes and shapes. Her hand shook when she finally picked up a brush. The paint felt wrong, too thick and slippery compared to charcoal and berry juice. Her first strokes were tentative and clumsy, creating muddy colors bearing no resemblance to the painting she was supposed to copy. But Lydia had the gift, and the gift didn't care about circumstances or materials or the broken heart of the vessel containing it. Within an hour her hands found their rhythm. Within 2 hours she began understanding how oils behaved differently from her improvised mediums but followed similar principles. Within 3 hours the landscape took shape on the canvas, becoming clear Lydia could not only copy the painting Eleonora showed her but improve upon it, adding depth and emotion the original lacked. By evening, when Eleonora returned, the painting was finished. Eleonora stood before it for a full minute without speaking, her face cycling through expressions Lydia couldn't read: surprise, satisfaction, something possibly greed, something else looking almost like rage. Finally she told Lydia the work was acceptable, that tomorrow she would begin a portrait, that Lydia should eat her dinner and sleep because more work lay ahead. The routine established itself with brutal efficiency. Every morning Eleonora brought food and gave Lydia her assignment, a landscape to copy, a portrait to paint from a photograph, a still life composition. Every evening Eleonora collected the finished work and gave next instructions. Days blurred together, distinguished only by which painting Lydia worked on, which colors she mixed, which techniques she taught herself through trial and error. The isolation was worse than the work. Lydia existed in a liminal space, neither in the house nor in the quarters, neither slave nor artisan, neither child nor adult. She was a secret, a ghost, a tool producing valuable art and otherwise irrelevant. She saw her mother once a week, visits Eleonora allowed as reward for good work and denied as punishment for resistance. Those visits were torture of a different kind, 15 minutes of desperate embracing and whispered assurances, Ruth trying to pretend everything would be all right while her eyes showed she knew it wouldn't, Lydia trying to be brave while her soul screamed for rescue never coming. The basement became Lydia's entire world. She learned its dimensions by heart, every crack in the stone walls, every variation in the damp smell, every position where the small window let in the most light. She learned to paint by lamplight when Eleonora demanded quick work, learned to ignore headaches from oil fumes and smoke, learned to function on inadequate food and sleep and complete absence of anything resembling joy. She painted landscapes never her landscape, mountains she would never climb, oceans she would never see. She painted portraits of white people from photographs Eleonora brought, wealthy planters and wives and children smiling into the camera with confidence of those never doubting their right to exist. Lydia captured their likenesses with precision but couldn't help adding something to their eyes, a hint of cruelty in the men, a shadow of complicity in the women, a disturbing emptiness in the children. Eleonora never seemed to notice these subtle rebellions, or if she did, didn't care because technical quality was so high any emotional ambiguity could be dismissed as artistic interpretation. After 3 months Eleonora began showing Lydia's work to select visitors, claiming the paintings as her own creation. She told elaborate stories about her artistic awakening after her husband's death, about how grief unlocked her creative spirit, about painting in frenzies of inspiration leaving her exhausted but fulfilled. Visitors believed her, they had no reason not to, the paintings existed and Eleonora possessed them, and the alternative explanation was unthinkable. A Charleston art dealer saw one landscape and offered to show Eleonora's work in his gallery. Eleonora accepted. Within weeks paintings Lydia created in a basement prison sold to wealthy Confederates for prices making Eleonora's eyes gleam with satisfaction. The money funded uniforms and supplies for Confederate soldiers, supported the very system keeping Lydia in chains, transformed her gift into fuel for the machinery of her own oppression. Eleonora became more demanding. She wanted more paintings, faster production, higher quality. She brought Lydia increasingly complex assignments, testing the limits of her abilities. She also grew paranoid about the secret being discovered, about Lydia somehow communicating the truth to someone who might believe it. Visits with Ruth became less frequent, then stopped altogether. Eleonora said Ruth had been reassigned to fieldwork, too busy to visit, but Lydia suspected Eleonora was simply cutting off her last remaining connection to humanity. The isolation deepened into something beyond loneliness. Lydia began feeling herself disappearing, her sense of self eroding under relentless pressure of being nothing but hands that painted, a tool creating art for others to claim. She stopped dreaming at night, or if she dreamed, didn't remember. She stopped thinking about escape or rescue or any future beyond the next painting. She existed in an eternal present of mixing colors and applying brushstrokes and creating beauty meaning nothing to her because it was stolen the moment finished. 6 months into her imprisonment, as winter settled over Georgia and the basement grew so cold Lydia's fingers sometimes went numb while painting, Eleonora made a new demand crossing a line Lydia hadn't known still existed. She brought a description and rough sketches of a scene she wanted painted, enslaved people working in a cotton field but happy about it, smiling, singing, content in bondage. The kind of propaganda painting justifying slavery by portraying it as a benevolent institution where Negroes were protected and provided for and naturally suited to their station. Eleonora explained a prominent Confederate official commissioned the painting, that it would hang in a government building in Richmond, that it would help the Southern cause by showing the world the truth about the peculiar institution. She said truth without irony, without acknowledging she was demanding Lydia use her gift to create a lie, to betray her people, to paint chains as if flower garlands. Lydia refused. It was the first time she refused anything since imprisonment began. She said she wouldn't paint it, couldn't paint it, that Eleonora could beat her or starve her or sell her mother, but she would not use her hands to create that particular obscenity. The words came out stronger than she felt, fueled by rage building for months, rage at Eleonora and the world and God and herself for being powerless. Eleonora's response was measured and terrible. She didn't shout or hit Lydia. She simply left the basement, locked the door, and didn't return for 3 days. No food, no water, no light except the small window showing day turning to night turning to day. Lydia survived by licking condensation from stone walls and trying to ignore hunger consuming her from inside. She survived, but barely. And when Eleonora finally returned with food and water and that cold smile, Lydia understood she would paint the propaganda piece because the alternative was death. She painted enslaved people picking cotton with smiles on their faces. She painted a son looking warm and gentle instead of brutal and punishing. She painted an overseer looking paternal rather than threatening. She painted a lie so convincing people seeing it would nod and feel comfortable in their prejudices, point to the painting as proof slavery was natural and right and kind. While painting, Lydia cried. Tears fell onto her palette, mixed with colors, diluting them. She kept adding more paint to compensate. She cried and painted, creating a masterpiece of propaganda outliving her and carrying its poison into the future. When finished, Eleonora praised the work effusively, called it Lydia's best painting yet, seemed genuinely pleased with both technical quality and subject matter. That night Lydia felt something break inside, not will to survive, too deep an animal to break, but something else harder to name. Her sense she was still human, still someone rather than something. She lay on her thin mattress, stared at darkness, felt herself becoming hollow, her spirit excavated by forces she couldn't fight, the gift once joy becoming an instrument of torture. Winter deepened and Lydia's health declined. The damp cold, inadequate food, toxic fumes from oil paints, absolute lack of sunlight and fresh air, all accumulated in her small body like poison. She developed a cough that wouldn't leave, lost weight she couldn't afford, moved through days in a fog of exhaustion making thinking difficult. But still she painted, because stopping meant consequences she couldn't bear, because her mother's life still hung in balance, because the machine claiming her wouldn't release until consuming everything she had to give. Eleonora noticed the decline but only in terms affecting productivity. She brought better food occasionally, added a thin blanket to Lydia's sleeping arrangements, installed a small stove doing little against pervasive cold. These improvements were purely practical, investments maintaining a valuable tool, containing no trace of compassion or recognition of Lydia's humanity. Spring arrived outside, bringing warmth and new life to a world Lydia could only glimpse through her small window, and her second year of imprisonment began. She was 11 now, though birthdays meant nothing in the basement where time was measured only in paintings completed and days survived. Eleonora's reputation as an artist had grown considerably. She was invited to show work in Atlanta and Savannah, received commissions from wealthy families across Georgia and South Carolina, was written about in newspapers as a bright light in Southern culture, a reminder civilization flourished even during wartime. Every word of praise belonged to Lydia. Every painting hanging in parlors and galleries and government buildings had been created by her hands, torn from her soul, costing pieces of herself never recovered. The injustice was so vast Lydia couldn't hold it all in her mind at once, could only feel it in fragments, glimpses of rage and sorrow flaring up and then suppressed because rage and sorrow didn't mix colors or apply brushstrokes. In late spring Eleonora received her most prestigious commission yet, a series of 6 paintings depicting Southern life and virtue, intended as gifts for Confederate generals. The paintings would be large, complex, ambitious. Eleonora was excited in a way Lydia had never seen, already planning how the commission would cement her reputation, how she would be remembered as one of the great artists of the Confederacy. She explained requirements to Lydia in detail: 2 landscapes showing Southern beauty, 2 portraits of idealized Southern families, 2 genre paintings showing daily plantation life, the same propaganda as before but more sophisticated, subtle, designed to appeal to educated tastes. Eleonora brought reference materials, photographs, sketches, descriptions, and gave Lydia a deadline of 3 months to complete all 6 works. It was too much, even for someone with Lydia's gift. 6 major paintings in 3 months would have been challenging under ideal circumstances. In the basement, working with inadequate light and declining health, it was nearly impossible. But impossible didn't matter, refusal meant consequences Lydia had learned not to risk. So she began the work, painting 12 and 14 hours a day, falling asleep at the easel, sometimes waking with brush marks on her face and stiffness in every muscle. The paintings emerged slowly, each taking pieces of Lydia she didn't have to spare. She painted plantation houses looking like palaces instead of prisons. She painted white children playing while enslaved children watched from background, smiling as if enjoying exclusion. She painted masters and mistresses looking wise and benevolent. She painted a world never existing except in fantasies of people needing to believe their cruelty was kindness. And with each painting, Lydia disappeared a little more. The cough troubling her through winter became constant, racking her small frame, sometimes bringing up blood. Her hands developed tremors making fine detail difficult. Her eyes, strained from years of close work in poor light, began blurring and aching. She was dying slowly but certainly, consumed by the gift Eleonora harvested like cotton from a field. 2 months into the commission, Lydia began the final painting, a landscape supposed to show a cotton field at sunset, all golden light and pastoral beauty. Eleonora had provided extensive notes about composition, lighting, mood. But when Lydia looked at the blank canvas, something shifted inside, a spark of rebellion, a flash of the self she had been before the basement, a refusal to disappear completely without leaving some mark of truth. She painted the landscape as Eleonora specified, creating sunset and cotton field and distant trees. But in foreground shadows, where casual viewers might not look closely, where the painting would reveal itself only to those truly examining it, Lydia painted herself. A self-portrait hidden in darkness, her own face emerging from shadows with eyes staring directly at viewer. She painted her exhaustion, sorrow, rage, humanity. She painted herself as witness and victim, creator and prisoner, truth hiding beneath lie. She painted herself and knew Eleonora wouldn't notice, wouldn't understand significance even if noticing, wouldn't recognize Lydia created a secret message in the language of art that might someday be understood by someone with eyes to see. The painting finished in early August. The 6 works packed carefully and sent to destination, Eleonora glowing with satisfaction at completing such a prestigious commission. Lydia lay on her mattress, coughed blood into a rag, felt death approaching like a slow tide, inevitable and almost welcome. She was 12 years old, had created art surviving generations, art people would admire and study, art carrying her soul in every brushstroke. But nobody would ever know. Nobody would ever see her name beside her work. Nobody would know she existed, suffered, gave everything she had to give and then been asked for more. In basement darkness, Lydia Moore closed her eyes and wondered if disappearing completely might be a kind of freedom. Autumn arrived with cooler temperatures providing no relief to basement damp chill. Lydia's 12th year marked by deterioration so gradual she barely noticed herself fading, like a painting left too long in direct sunlight, colors leaching away imperceptibly until one day you looked and realized image half gone. The cough became constant companion, rattling presence in her chest worsening at night, keeping from sleep her exhausted body desperately needed. Her fingers, once moving across canvas with fluid confidence, now trembled and stiffened, requiring willpower controlling each stroke. Eleonora noticed decline because it affected quality and speed. Paintings still extraordinary, Lydia's gift too fundamental to be completely eroded by illness, but they took longer, and occasionally Eleonora found mistakes needing correction, small imperfections old Lydia never would have made. These imperfections enraged Eleonora in ways Lydia's suffering did not, because imperfections threatened illusion of Eleonora's genius, threatened reputation built on stolen talent. Punishments became more frequent and creative. Eleonora withheld food for days, reasoning hunger would sharpen focus. She removed thin blanket during cold nights, believing discomfort would motivate faster work. She installed a bell in basement ringing at random hours, disrupting little sleep Lydia managed, keeping her in constant exhaustion making resistance impossible and obedience automatic. But cruelest punishment was complete severing of contact with Ruth. Lydia hadn't seen her mother in 4 months, hadn't heard voice, felt embrace. Eleonora claimed Ruth still on plantation, alive and well, safe as long as Lydia continued producing paintings. But Lydia had no way verifying claims. For all she knew, mother already sold or died or simply given up and let grief consume her. Uncertainty was its own torture, constant anxiety gnawing at Lydia's mind while body weakened. In late September Eleonora received a letter from a prominent collector in Savannah who purchased 3 Eleonora paintings and wanted to commission a major work, a large-scale historical painting depicting founding of Georgia, complete with multiple figures and elaborate detail. The commission came with substantial payment and promise of prominent display in a new museum being established to celebrate Confederate history and Southern heritage. Eleonora accepted immediately, seeing commission as pinnacle of fraudulent career, work cementing legacy as one of South's great artists. She brought commission details to Lydia with barely contained excitement, laying out sketches and descriptions and historical references across worktable. The painting would need to be 6 feet wide and 4 feet tall, include at least 20 figures in period costume, show ships and buildings and landscape, tell story of colonial glory and manifest destiny. It was most ambitious project Eleonora ever demanded, and she gave Lydia 4 months to complete it. Lydia looked at blank canvas specially prepared, at mountain of preparatory work required, at Eleonora's gleaming eyes seeing only opportunity and reputation and money, never the dying child creating this masterpiece while chained in basement. Something inside Lydia, some last reserve of will sustaining her through 2.5 years imprisonment, simply gave up. She told Eleonora she couldn't do it, too sick, hands didn't work right anymore, painting beyond capacity. Eleonora's face transformed from excitement to fury instantly. She grabbed Lydia's chin, fingers digging painfully into hollow cheeks, forcing Lydia to meet her eyes. She said Lydia would complete painting because alternative unthinkable, because Ruth's life still hung in balance, because Lydia existed for no purpose except creating art Eleonora could claim. She said if Lydia failed, refused, died before completing commission, then Eleonora would make sure Ruth suffered for daughter's defiance, would make punishment creative and prolonged and absolutely devastating. The threat worked, because it always worked, because Eleonora identified the one leverage controlling Lydia no matter how broken she became. Lydia nodded submission. Eleonora released chin, leaving fingerprint bruises fading long before emotional damage. Eleonora left basement in swirl of skirts and satisfaction, and Lydia turned to face enormous blank canvas consuming last of strength and probably her life. She began preparatory work next day, creating detailed sketches mapping composition, determining figure placement, establishing perspective and lighting. Even weakened, with trembling hands and blurred vision, Lydia's fundamental understanding of art remained intact. She knew instinctively how to balance composition, guide viewer's eye, create depth and movement and narrative within static image. The gift that had been her curse still there, still functioning, still producing miracles even as vessel containing it crumbled. Actual painting began early October and quickly became prolonged dying. Lydia worked from dawn until lamp ran out of oil each night, standing at easel until legs gave out, and she worked sitting down, mixing colors until fingers bled from cold and chemicals, applying paint with brushes growing heavier each day. Historical scene took shape slowly, ships arriving in harbor, colonists establishing settlement, Native Americans watching from treeline, all rendered with meticulous attention to period detail and historical accuracy. Eleonora provided extensive research, but Lydia added touches, small elements transforming painting from mere illustration into something more complex and troubling. Colonists' faces showed determination but also greed, hunger for land and power barely concealed beneath civilized veneers. Native Americans' expressions held knowledge of what coming, present sorrow making static poses dynamic with unspoken tragedy. Sky Lydia painted beautiful but ominous, suggesting founding moments celebrated contained seeds of future violence and injustice. None of these subtleties conscious choices, Lydia too exhausted for conscious artistry. She simply painted what her hands knew, what her gift demanded. And truth bled through despite Eleonora's specifications and propaganda purpose painting meant to serve. Truth had way asserting itself in Lydia's work, showing in shadows and expressions and compositional choices revealing more than surface appearances suggested. By November painting half finished and Lydia dying. No longer any question, no way pretending illness temporary or youth and resilience pulling through. Body pushed beyond limits too long, deprived of too much sunlight, fresh air, adequate nutrition, human connection, hope. The banzo-consuming enslaved people who lost will to live had taken root in Lydia's spirit, finishing what malnutrition and toxic fumes and physical exhaustion started. She coughed constantly now, great racking spasms leaving gasping and weak, bringing up blood in quantities frightening even her. Appetite disappeared completely, food tasted like ash, sat heavy in stomach. Most days she ate only because Eleonora forced her, standing over and threatening consequences until Lydia choked down enough sustaining another day of work. Weight dropped so dramatically chain around ankle kept slipping off, requiring Eleonora have it tightened, adjustment leaving raw sores where metal rubbed against skin stretched tight over bone. Vision failing too, not just strain of close work in poor light, but deeper deterioration making world appear increasingly dim and blurred. She worked closer and closer to canvas seeing details, mixed colors by feel as much as sight, trusted muscle memory and instinct compensating for eyes no longer reliably reporting. Some days basement seemed darkening around her, even though lamp burned steadily, as if consciousness itself flickering and fading, preparing for extinction. Eleonora saw all this and cared only to extent threatening commission completion. She brought a doctor examining Lydia once, a nervous man taking one look at chained child in basement and clearly wanting no part of moral compromise asked to participate in. He listened to chest, looked at eyes, checked pulse, told Eleonora with obvious discomfort girl severely ill, needed rest and proper food and fresh air and sunlight, without significant changes to circumstances, would likely die within months. Eleonora dismissed concerns with practiced ease. She said girl prone to exaggeration, being well cared for, surely medicine addressing immediate symptoms without dramatic lifestyle changes. Doctor prescribed tonics and cough suppressants, accepted payment, left with visible relief, choosing to believe Eleanora's reassurances rather than confront obvious truth happening in the basement. It was easier that way. It always was. Tonics did nothing. Lydia continued deteriorating and painting continued growing, two processes inversely related as canvas filled with life and color and historical pageantry, artist creating it emptying out, becoming shell, ghost, fading presence barely tethered to existence. By early December Lydia worked in haze of fever and delirium, no longer entirely certain real from hallucination. Sometimes saw mother standing in corner, smiling and singing old songs. Sometimes saw shadow, wolf from William Robinson's story heard whispered in quarters years ago, ghost animal keeping vigil over another dying child. Sometimes saw angels or demons or nothing at all, just darkness pressing from all sides. But hands kept working. Even when mind wandered, even when couldn't remember where or why painting, hands remembered, mixing colors, loading brushes, applying paint with accumulated skill of years' forced practice. The gift that had been cursed remained faithful to end, continuing producing beauty even as vessel containing it approached total failure. Eleanora grew increasingly anxious as Lydia's condition worsened and deadline approached. She promised painting by Christmas, already spent part commission payment, told collector work proceeding magnificently. She couldn't afford Lydia dying before completion, couldn't afford embarrassment and financial loss, couldn't afford fraud exposed through simple mechanism of tool breaking before job done. She tried strategies keeping Lydia alive and working. Brought better food Lydia couldn't eat. Adjusted work schedule allowing more rest Lydia couldn't take because nightmares and pain made sleep impossible. Brought small heater doing nothing against damp cold seeping into bones. Even, in moment of panic finding Lydia unconscious at easel, brought Ruth to visit, thinking maternal presence might revive dying girl. Visit brief and devastating. Ruth hadn't seen daughter in 6 months, hadn't known extent physical decline, hadn't fully understood what done to Lydia in Eleanora's basement. When saw skeletal child chained to wall, saw blood-stained rags and hollow eyes and paintings surrounding daughter like beautiful accusations, Ruth's scream echoed through house with raw anguish making even Eleanora look uncomfortable. Ruth held Lydia and wept and begged Eleanora to stop, to let child rest, to show mercy, to remember this human being, child, someone's daughter. She offered take Lydia's place, work twice as hard, do anything if Eleanora would just let Lydia go. Eleanora listened with mild annoyance of someone asked make irrational business decision. She explained Lydia had job finish, work nearly complete, afterward time rest and recovery. She said as if believing it, as if obvious reality Lydia's imminent death invisible, as if will and wishful thinking overriding physical collapse. Visit ended Ruth dragged away still weeping. Lydia returned work with tears streaming, painting through blurred vision, adding grief to image colonial founding becoming final masterpiece. She painted ships looking like coffins, colonists' faces holding blank righteousness of those causing suffering without acknowledging, sky suggesting judgment deferred not forgotten. She painted own death into celebration of beginning, encoded suffering into myth of glory, created palimpsest where truth showed through lies for anyone with eyes willing see. Painting completed 3 days before Christmas. Lydia applied final brushstrokes in state near complete dissociation, body moving automatically while consciousness floating distant and disconnected. When sat down brush last time, felt no triumph or relief or satisfaction, just vast emptiness and bone-deep exhaustion suggesting body waiting permission stop fighting. Eleanora came collect finished painting and found even better than hoped, technically flawless, historically detailed, compositionally brilliant, exactly work cementing reputation as major artist. She praised Lydia effusively, called work magnificent, promised now Lydia could rest and recover. She said cheerfully, apparently oblivious Lydia barely conscious, breathing shallow and labored, death obviously approaching. Painting taken away framed and delivered. Eleanora left basement high spirits, already composing in mind storytelling about creative process, struggles and inspirations, personal meaning work held. She locked door behind, and Lydia alone again with chains and dying body and toxic fumes lingering months oil paint application. Lydia lasted 3 more days. Days increasing confusion and decreasing consciousness, fever dreams blending memory and fantasy, pain moved beyond acute suffering into numb inevitability. She drifted between sleep and waking without clear distinction, saw visions mother and father and old Isaiah from quarters and shadow wolf and angels' faces looking like paintings created. Felt chain ankle but couldn't remember why there. Felt cold but couldn't remember ever warm. Felt body shutting down system by system, felt becoming less substantial, felt boundary between existing and not existing growing porous. Third day, December 28, 1862, Lydia Moore stopped breathing. No drama, no final words or gestures, no moment clarity or peace. Simply slipped labored breathing to no breathing, barely alive to definitively dead, body giving up struggle without fanfare or witness. She died alone basement, chained to wall, surrounded paint fumes and darkness. 12 years old and already used up completely. Eleonora found body next morning bringing breakfast and discussing next commission. Stood doorway long moment staring small corpse mattress, expression cycling surprise and annoyance and calculation. No grief, no remorse, no acknowledgement killed child surely as if put gun to head, only practical consideration disposal and social consideration maintaining appearances. She had 2 enslaved men remove body after dark, wrapped same thin blanket Lydia used warmth. Buried far corner plantation in section reserved slaves dying without family claim, grave without marker or ceremony. Ruth not told 2 days, not allowed see body, not given opportunity goodbye or grieving or basic human dignity acknowledging daughter's death. When finally learned happened, well anguish echoed across plantation, sound profound sorrow even hardest overseers looked away and felt briefly ashamed. Eleonora went public mourning, not for Lydia. She mourned lost inspiration, mysterious force enabling artistic flowering now inexplicably departed. Told visitors grief war finally caught up, sorrow son dying in battle, Marcus killed Antietam, news reached 2 weeks before Lydia's death, dried wellspring creativity sustaining work. Accepted condolences and support, played bereaved mother and blocked artist convincing sincerity, quietly began planning retirement public artistic life. She had enough paintings completed maintaining reputation, substantial proceeds years commission sales, historical painting legacy already hanging new museum Savannah already praised masterwork Southern art. Could afford stop now, step back remembered artistic burst defining middle years, live comfortably reputation Lydia Moore created and paid for with life. War continued another 2.5 years, ultimately ending Confederate defeat and collapse society sustaining slavery. Magnolia Creek Plantation burned Sherman's March c. Main house reduced blackened timbers rubble, fields left reverting wilderness, enslaved people scattered seeking family sold away, heading north toward promised freedom, trying build lives ashes bondage. Ruth survived war but never recovered Lydia's death. Lived another 15 years working washerwoman Savannah, always searching information happened daughter, always hoping confirmation closure never came. Died 1877, never knowing full extent Lydia endured, never knowing daughter's art survived celebrated, never knowing Lydia's final act rebellion, hidden self-portrait shadows, still waiting discovered. Eleonora Vance lived 73, dying 1893 natural causes comfortable circumstances. Remembered obituary talented artist brief brilliant career produced works lasting value, pillar community, woman maintained dignity grace through personal tragedy societal upheaval. Obituary mentioned late husband and son died war. Did not mention Lydia Moore. Paintings survived. That art's terrible power and terrible irony, outlasting people created it, outlasting circumstances creation, outlasting memory truth justice. Lydia's work, signed Eleonora's name, past generations owners, moved private collections museums, studied analyzed praised critics marveling technical skill emotional depth, wondering mysterious period intense productivity followed artistic silence. 6 major commission paintings ended scattered institutions. Historical painting Georgia's founding became centerpiece Savannah Museum permanent collection, displayed prominently, used educational materials, reproduced textbooks. Propaganda painting happy enslaved people cotton fields purchased private collector eventually donated Southern Heritage Society used decades supporting mythology benevolent slavery. Landscape Lydia's hidden self-portrait went museum Charleston, hung over century before anyone looked closely enough see hiding shadows. Discovery came 1968 graduate student researching Southern art examining paintings attributed Eleonora Vance noticed something strange shadows cottonfield landscape. Using magnification careful observation, identified face emerging darkness foreground, black child's face haunting sorrowful eyes seeming stare directly viewer. Discovery puzzling because Eleonora Vance never included elements other work, face stylistically different rest painting, emotional content contradicted pastoral beauty landscape. Graduate student, young black woman named Dr. Catherine Mitchell, investigated further. Examined other paintings attributed Eleonora Vance, looking similar anomalies, studying technique style inconsistencies. Researched Eleonora biography, information artistic training development. Found records commissioned sales, documentation Eleanora sudden burst productivity early 1860s followed equally sudden retirement. More investigated, less official story made sense. Dr. Mitchell's research led plantation records, bills sale property inventories, fragmentary documentation lives considered insignificant record detail. Found Ruth Moore's name Magnolia Creek records, mentioned daughter Lydia, gap both names disappeared plantation ledgers late 1862. Found Eleanora Vance household account same period, unexplained purchases artist supplies quantities far exceeding one painter need, payments doctors, references unnamed illness. Interviewed descendants people enslaved Magnolia Creek, old men women remembered stories grandparents told. Stories girl taken big house never came back, paintings appearing suddenly magic, mother's grief never healed. Stories fragmentary sometimes contradictory, distorted time trauma unreliability oral history, but pointed consistently same conclusion. Eleanora Vance not created paintings attributed her. Someone else had, someone name existence deliberately erased. Dr. Mitchell published findings 1972 paper titled The Invisible Artist, Evidence of Enslaved Labor in Southern Art Production. Paper controversial widely dismissed art establishment significant investments financial reputational institutional maintaining authentication works attributed Eleanora Vance. Critics argued Dr. Mitchell evidence circumstantial, face shadows explained artistic fancy, no definitive proof connecting Lydia Moore paintings. Debate continued years, some scholars supporting Dr. Mitchell conclusions, others defending Eleanora authorship. Museums reluctant revise attributions without incontrovertible proof, such proof difficult obtain work created century earlier circumstances specifically designed conceal truth. Paintings remained attributed Eleanora Vance most institutional records, occasional footnotes mentioning disputed authorship. But Dr. Mitchell work planted seed grew slowly subsequent decades as art history grappled questions attribution authenticity, as institutions began acknowledging roles perpetuating historical injustices, as technologies improved analyzing paintings detecting presence multiple hands hidden elements. Case Lydia Moore gained renewed attention. 2019 Advanced imaging technology used to examine paintings thoroughly, X-ray fluorescence, infrared reflectography, other techniques revealed layers information invisible casual observation. Found evidence compositional changes stylistic variations suggesting multiple artistic hands significant evolution technique short periods. Found several paintings small anomalies, faces shadows, figures barely visible beneath later paint layers, elements seeming tell different story surface image suggested. Most significantly, found 5 different paintings small carefully hidden marks appearing initials LM worked shadows background details ways invisible unless new look. 5 paintings. 5 signatures. 5 quiet rebellions against erasure. 5 attempts dying child leave evidence existed, created, mattered. Art world responded slowly reluctantly, institutions always do asked confront uncomfortable truths collections. Some museums revised attributions, attributed Eleanora Vance, disputed, possibly studio assistants. Few, particularly specific commitments acknowledging historical injustices, went further reattributed works, unknown enslaved artist, possibly Lydia Moore, attributed Eleanora Vance. But most institutions, even acknowledging possibility probability Lydia authorship, maintained Eleanora name primary attribution. Cited uncertainty extent Lydia contribution, impossibility definitively proving authorship after much time, precedent attribution changes required incontrovertible evidence. Behind scholarly justifications lay practical considerations, collections valued millions dollars, donor relationships built existing attributions, educational materials catalogs needing revision, simple institutional inertia making change difficult even when change right. And so Lydia Moore remains largely invisible year 2025, Moore 160 years death. Some scholars no name argue recognition work. Some museums acknowledge small text wall labels attribution disputed. Some activists protest outside institutions continuing display work Eleanora Vance name. But vast majority visitors museums galleries across South, paintings still work Eleanora Vance, talented Southern artist brief brilliant career produced masterpieces continue move inspire viewers generations later. Paintings themselves remain magnificent. Time not diminish technical skill emotional power. Landscapes still draw viewers carefully composed depths. Portraits still capture something essential subjects transcends physical likeness. Historical painting Georgia's founding still commands attention scale detail narrative complexity. Propaganda painting enslaved people cotton fields still serves evidence, though not evidence Eleonora intended, how art weaponized support injustice. And Charleston Museum, landscape hidden self-portrait still hangs prominent position viewed thousands visitors year. Most never look closely shadows foreground, never notice face hidden, never see Lydia Moore staring across century half, eyes asking seen, acknowledged, remembered. Occasionally someone pauses looks closely, drawn something can't articulate, since painting contains more surface beauty suggests. Lean peer shadows. Sometimes, light right paying attention, see her, black child face emaciated sorrowful eyes seeming hold accusation plea. See feel unsettled, feel something wrong even if can't immediately identify. Most move without investigating further, without reading wall text mention small print disputed attribution, without connecting face shadows story theft abuse murder painting contains. Move next painting, next gallery, next experience. And Lydia Moore returns invisibility, returns shadow hidden shadows, goes someone else painting, story world chosen not here. But she there. Will always there, hidden work created, waiting found, waiting day world finally ready see refusing acknowledge. Genius suffering coexist. Beauty emerge brutality. Humanity persists even circumstances designed destroy. Art created enslaved hands belongs those hands, not masters claimed. Lydia Moore died 12 years old, used up discarded, buried unmarked grave, name erased work created. But gift survived. Truth survived. Face shadows survived. Perhaps its own immortality, its own justice, incomplete delayed inadequate but present nonetheless. In basement Charleston Museum storage rooms not accessible public, curators preserved fragments historical record related Eleanora Vance disputed works. Eleanora personal papers, letters diaries household accounts. Plantation records Magnolia Creek. Bills sale property inventories. Newspaper clippings Eleanora artistic career. Scholarly articles arguing attribution. Dr. Catherine Mitchell original research notes donated museum death 2003. And one other item found 2015 renovations building once served slave quarters near where Magnolia Creek plantation stood. Archaeologists excavating site found buried corner cabin floor small bundle wrapped oilcloth. Inside several pieces cloth painted berry juice, crude paintings child hand showing faces birds scenes plantation life. Beneath paintings scrap paper probably torn ledger book words written careful uncertain letters. Asterisk my name is Lydia Moore. I made these pictures. I am real, asterisk. Bundle preserved acid-free containers climate-controlled storage. Catalog documented occasionally brought researchers examine. But not display, not part exhibition, not something public knows exists. Just artifact storage, another piece evidence waiting day story tells becomes impossible ignore, when institutions individuals finally decide truth matters tradition, justice delayed 160 years worth pursuing even now, 12-year-old enslaved girl painted masterpieces basement prison deserves name restored work created dying hands. That day may come, or not. But Lydia Moore paintings survive. Face hidden shadows survives. Truth survives, waiting patiently way truth always waits, knowing eventually inevitably buried surfaces, hidden revealed, stolen recognized theft always was. Lydia Moore real. Created beauty outlived century. Deserves remembered. Deserves honored. Deserves name spoken people stand before work feel hearts break little skill sorrow rendered oil canvas. Deserves more invisibility. Deserves more shadows. Deserves stolen recognition, acknowledgement simple human dignity existence achievement acknowledged world enriched suffering. Until acknowledgement comes, she waits paintings shadows hidden signatures fragmentary records stories past generations conscience anyone willing see history tried hide. Waits, and eyes painted shadows stare world refusing see, asking question asked life asks still death. Asterisk do you see me? Do you see me, asterisk?